Hello and welcome. My name is Vineet Malhotra and you're watching America 360 on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Millions took to the streets across all 50 US states in the No Kings protest, condemning President Trump's hardline policies. The demonstrations, with organizers claiming 7 million attendees, called for the protection of democracy and criticized the Trump administration's authoritarianism. President Trump announced that the US will end all payments and subsidies to Colombia over ongoing drug production issues. Trump also labeled Colombian President Gustavo Petro as an illegal drug leader. One of the stolen jewelry pieces from the Louvre in Paris has been found near the museum. According to France's cultural minister, Rachida Dati, the robbers had taken priceless items from a gallery that houses France's crown jewels. Israel returned 15 Palestinian bodies to Gaza on Sunday, bringing the total to 150. The handover is part of a ceasefire deal brokered by US President Donald Trump, with Hamas returning 2 Israeli hostages remains on Saturday. Ukrainian drones have struck Russia's Orenburg gas processing plant, which is the world's largest facility of its kind. The Ukrainian attacks have caused fire and no casualties, according to Governor Yevgeny Solentsev. The attack has reportedly damaged parts of Gazprom's complex with a 45 billion cubic meter annual capacity. Pakistan and Afghanistan have agreed to an immediate ceasefire following deadly border clashes, with mediation by Qatar and Turkey. The Taliban and Pakistan's government have both agreed to refrain from targeting each other. Japan's Liberal Democratic Party and Japan Innovation Party, known locally as Ishin Party, have agreed to form a coalition government, paving the way for Sane Takachi to become Japan's first female prime minister. A massive fire at Hazrat Shah Jalal International Airport's cargo complex in Bangladesh caused significant damage, impacting textiles and garment exports. Authorities have started damage assessments, with business groups warning of millions in losses. All right, well, a series of demonstrations have taken place in the United States under the banner of No Kings protests. The widespread protests have raised voices against the Trump administration. The movement asserts that the executive is using its power without considering the limits imposed by the Constitution. The first major No Kings protest occurred in June, drawing millions of participants across the United States. Over 5 million people participated during those protests. The protests were to challenge the army parade on President Trump's birthday celebrations. However, the second wave of protests has gained momentum, garnering support from Democratic leaders and civil society personalities. These events have taken place in the backdrop of government shutdown. More than 7 million people joined the demonstrations in more than 2,500 locations across 50 states. The people are protesting against the government shutdown and what they perceive as the administration's authoritarian policies. Let's in fact listen into what the protesters had to say.
Here because I'm a U.S. citizen, was born in the U.S., have been deeply troubled by the turns that have taken place since Trump got reelected, and don't accept what's happening. I think it's hugely problematic for the state of U.S. democracy, but it gives an example to so much more of the world, and the networks that are propelling Trump are at work everywhere.
I think even though this may seem like an American-centric issue, it really isn't. We can see the rise of fascism around the world.
I think that the state of the world that we are in right now is really horrible. I want my rights back. I'm pissed off. I need Trump out of office. And yeah, no king.
Ross Feingold, political analyst, is joining us from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, appreciate you being over here. Well, what do these protests signify? The one thing which is noticeable and extremely palpable at this point in time, that more people have joined in at this time than there were people the last time such a protest took place. What does this mean, for the democratic fabric in the United States, which says or rather the Democratic Party and its supporters say that the Constitution is being compromised?
Ultimately, it might not mean much. And the reason why I say that is this just might be people who didn't vote for Trump or Republicans anyway in the last election or the last several elections. So what it means for future elections, it's just completely unknown at the moment. Does it signal a significant shift away from Trump and Republicans? I think that remains to be seen. It's certainly possible. I mean, people are frustrated about the continued increase in the cost of living, for example. But the people who voted for Trump, which is approximately half the electorate, for the most part, they're still happy with him. And that's on a range of issues. People who voted for Trump, they voted for him whether because of social issues or because Trump promised to crack down on illegal immigration. And people who voted for Trump, frankly, they have many reasons to be happy with him. And again, these protests look enthusiastic, but is it the early signs of a significant movement? I think it's simply too early to tell.
Right, and Ross, let's also talk about the fact that Donald Trump perhaps becomes one of those very few presidents who's in fact had to face or come to in fact some sort of a meeting point with a large part of the population of the United States that does not agree with his policies.
Well, I think any president deals with that, right? The last few elections, notwithstanding the result in the Electoral College, have shown the electorate is fairly divided. And the U.S. Congress, whether the House or the Senate, those have swung back and forth in the recent decade plus, as well, swung back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. So we have a very highly partisan environment in the United States. That's obvious. Is it going to change anytime soon? Of course not. Elections will continue to be close, including next year's congressional elections, where the map looks good for the Republicans in the Senate, but it will be a bit more difficult to defend the House. But they might very well do so. And then we'll look back on these No Kings protests and say, well, it was just a bunch of enthusiastic people, but it didn't really signify a trend. On the other hand, sure, there's plenty of time and plenty of issues over which popular opinion against President Trump and Republicans could grow. But again, it's just too early to say.
Ross, appreciate you joining us. Thank you. All right, President Donald Trump has announced that the United States will be sending 2 suspected drug traffickers back to their native Ecuador and Colombia after a military strike on their drug smuggling submarine in the Caribbean killed 2 others. Colombian President Gustavo Petro confirmed the Colombian suspect had been repatriated but accused Washington of having killed a fisherman in an earlier strike. The strike is the latest in an unprecedented U.S. military campaign that President Trump says is aimed at choking the flow of drugs from Latin America to the United States. At least 6 vessels, most of them speedboats, have been targeted by U.S. strikes in the Caribbean since September, with Venezuela alleged to have been the origin of some of them. All right, David K. Johnston, American author, is joining us from New York at this point in time. David, appreciate you joining us. While it's a good thing that Donald Trump is extremely passionate about controlling the inflow and influx of drugs into American borders, but there are a number of detractors who go about saying that the approach and perhaps the methodology with which there's been a fallout with other countries is perhaps not the best way to deal with it. Your thoughts?
Well, it's certainly not the best way to deal with it because it's 100% illegal. No law, no power in the American Constitution gives the president the authority to do what Trump is doing. And in at least 2 of these cases, we have good reason to believe that these were not drug boats. They were poor fishermen who were murdered, and I mean that word very intentionally, by American military forces. A number of retired military lawyers have all said loudly and clearly in multiple forums that there is no legal authority for what Trump is doing. If you suspect a boat has a contraband on it, whether it's drugs, guns, money, whatever, you interdict the boat, you inspect. If you find contraband, you seize it and you arrest the occupants. If you don't, you let the people go. But summarily killing people is something Donald Trump has been calling for since 1989, when he bought 5 full-page ads in major newspapers demanding the immediate execution of 5 young men accused of beating and raping a woman in Central Park. Of course, we now know those young men were innocent. We have the DNA and other proof and a confession from the actual perpetrator, and yet when these young men were released, Donald Trump reiterated his position that they should be summarily executed. This is murder, plain and simple.
David, what do you make of the protests that are happening in the United States at this point in time? In fact, these protests are not limited to the US alone. There have been similar protests in certain European cities as well. Do you think the overall impression that Donald Trump has been giving when it comes to overreaching or perhaps even overarching above the Constitution is sending a very wrong signal?
Well, your previous guest, Mr. Feingold, made what I thought was a very good point. These protests are not large enough to move the needle. Research by scholars who study authoritarianism says you need a minimum of 3.5% of the public out demonstrating to get real results. 7 million people isn't close. You need a minimum of 12 million people for those Republicans who understand that Donald Trump is behaving as a dictator. He's asserting authorities he does not have under our Constitution. And we got about 7 million, seems to be the most widely reported number. So that's essentially a little more than half of what's needed. And to really move the needle, I think you need to have 15, 20 million people turn out. Now, that may happen, especially when warm weather returns to much of the U.S. In April of next year before the elections, as the economy falters, as Trump and his cronies profit off the presidency, as healthcare premiums soar and many people lose healthcare coverage, and we see malnutrition among poor pregnant women and infants. But unless those numbers grow more, and for this demonstration they grew 40%, so that is a substantial increase in the turnout, that's not going to move what matters, and that is some of the Republicans to break with Trump the way Marjorie Taylor Greene has on key issues.
David, appreciate you joining us. All right, breaking news coming in. An exclusive report citing US and Israeli sources says that Israel notified US administration in advance of the strikes in Gaza. The ceasefire in Gaza, brokered by US President Donald Trump, came under strain after Israeli airstrikes targeted Hamas in response to attacks on its forces. Israel claimed that Hamas violated the truce and stated that there is a possibility of further strikes, while Hamas accused Israel of fabricating excuses to resume attacks. The two sides remained at a deadlock, with the ceasefire facing continued challenges. Under the truce, Israel returned bodies of 15 Palestinians to Gaza, but the issue of hostage remains contentious. Matthew Vadum, American journalist, is joining us from Washington, D.C. at this point in time. Matthew, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking with us. Well, according to a number of geopolitical pundits, there was a lot of pessimism around this truce. Is it, fructifying through, Hamas violating this ceasefire already?
Well, I don't think anyone who's contemplated or spent a lot of time analyzing the nature of Hamas thought that they were going to adhere to the peace pact. They are a bunch of murderous terrorists, and they're not happy when they're not killing people. So they're slaughtering their own citizens right now. Hamas is, and I'm not sure what can be done about it, but I think it goes against, if not the letter of the peace pact, certainly the spirit of the peace pact. They are cracking down. My understanding is they're cracking down on Palestinians, Gazans who are deemed to be disloyal to the Hamas regime, and they are punishing them for collaborating with the Israelis. And, you know, this is their terrorist group, Islamist terrorist group, and this is what they do. Now, whether, you know, Israel or the United States will get involved, I don't know. Whether this will derail the peace plan, I don't know yet. It's hard to say, but you know, it's not off to a very good start when Hamas is already using such violence against its own people in the wake of the peace pact. So I'm not optimistic. I don't know if they can ever reach a settlement, lasting peace there, unless Hamas is eliminated. And,
but Matthew,
for the time being,
isn't this what Donald Trump has also vowed to do? That Hamas needs to demilitarize, and even Netanyahu has made this overture over and over again that all right, these ceasefire talks are fine, but unless Hamas is stripped of its weapons, it's not going to be a very, very optimistic situation.
You're right, but to what extent, what steps are they actually going to take to enforce those words? I don't know. You know, the world is wary of the war in Gaza, and has largely, unfortunately, in my view, turned against the state of Israel. And they don't get a lot of support from abroad, just, you know, from the United States and a few other allies. So I don't know, you know, they should disarm Hamas. Hamas should give up its weapons, but that is not in the nature of Hamas. Hamas was founded to destroy Israel. And, you know, to think that they're just going to sign a piece of paper and suddenly go away strikes me as somewhat naive. You know, though I think the intentions of Israel and the Trump administration were good here. You know, intentions, what's that cliche that's saying? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I don't know if it will hold, and you know, Hamas is a problem for now, and I think it's going to continue to be a problem.
All right, Matthew, appreciate you joining us. Thank you. All right, John Sandvig, former acting director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, criticized President Trump's immigration crackdown for putting federal agents in a terrible position. Sandvig argued that ICE and U.S. Border Patrol agents trained for border operations are now being deployed in urban areas like Chicago, where their tactics may not be suitable. Recent viral incidents, including a tear gas deployment in Chicago, have raised concerns over the use of force by federal agents. A federal judge ordered body cameras for agents in response to lawsuits alleging excessive tactics against protesters and journalists. Sandvig emphasized that agents are trained for high-risk border threats, not urban confrontations, which may lead to escalating tensions. Jerry Robinett, a DHS veteran, called the situation stressful for both agents and protesters, noting the uncharted nature of these confrontations. While DHS defended the use of force, blaming illegal aliens and agitators, the growing protests and legal challenges highlight the controversy surrounding the administration's immigration policies. Matthew Vadum, American journalist, with us on the broadcast. Matthew, of course, you know, the people who are supposed to be cracking down illegal immigrants at the border, if they are put into cities to do something similar, then it's obviously a massive shift in energy at the wrong place. And that is why this is a big concern.
Well, that was the allegation made by Mr. Sandweg, who was who's a Democrat, an appointee at ICE during the Obama administration, and he claims that ICE is ill-suited for urban confrontations. Well, I don't know what to say to that. That ICE has been doing urban law enforcement in an urban setting for decades. Perhaps he means that in places like Chicago, where the local authorities, the local government, the city government is hostile to ICE and makes it difficult for ICE to enforce federal immigration law, it's not surprising that ICE is going to run into some resistance. Now, to claim that a disservice is being done to ICE or to anyone else by making them enforce the law in Chicago is an absurd argument that cannot be sustained. They're just saying that so Chicago is just going to be off limits for ICE enforcement. If tough tactics are required, like the use of tear gas against rioters and Antifa people and illegal aliens using physical force to try to defeat ICE. Basically, Chicago wants, and the mayor of this, Brandon, the mayor of Chicago, has said that he wants to set up ICE-free zones in Chicago, meaning that the federal law cannot be enforced. And this, again, is an absurd claim that he's making that has no foundation in American law. U.S. immigration law takes precedence over state and local laws, and you can't just say, the two levels of law can coexist beside each other, but you cannot say that the federal government cannot come in to the city of Chicago and enforce federal law. That's just crazy. And if it ever goes to a court, it'll get slapped down hard pretty quickly.
All right.
So I think what's really happening here is that people who don't want ICE to enforce the law are complaining about it. And that's what that CBS News report that you cited, quoting Mr. Sandweg, I think that's what it's all about. They don't want the law to be enforced.
All right. Matthew, appreciate you joining
unhappy.
us. Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate you joining us. All right, moving on. Thieves, in fact, broke into the Louvre Museum in Paris Sunday morning, stealing valuable jewels, including a damaged 19th century crown, once belonging to Empress Eugenie, wife of Napoleon III, which was later found near the museum by authorities. The robbery took place around 9:30 a.m. local time as the museum was open to the public. The thieves entered the gallery housing France's crown jewels and escaped on motorbikes after a 4-minute heist. No injuries were reported and the Louvre closed for the day. French Cultural Minister Rachida Dati had previously claimed that the items were priceless. Let's listen in to what was said.
Nous nous sommes rendus immédiatement, quelques minutes après avoir eu l'information de ce vol. Et pour tout vous dire, cette opération a duré presque 4 minutes. Ça a été très rapide. Il faut quand même dire que ce sont des professionnels. La criminalité organisée aujourd'hui s'attaque aux objets d'art et les musées, évidemment, sont devenus des cibles. Parce que la France, comme vous le savez, la France est un pays patrimonial, un pays avec des objets historiques patrimoniaux.
All right, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky returned home from Washington, urging allies not to appease Russia after failing to secure long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States. Despite growing frustration with Russia, U.S. President Donald Trump emphasized diplomatic efforts with Russian President Vladimir Putin, including a planned meeting in Budapest. Zelensky urged Europe and the U.S. to take decisive steps in supporting Ukraine and holding Russia accountable. Meanwhile, Russia has intensified attacks on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, leaving thousands without heating as winter approaches. Zelensky reported over 3,270 attack drones and 50 missiles used against Ukraine in just a week. Ukraine responded with strikes on Russian border regions and key energy facilities. The conflict continues with fierce battles in Donetsk and Zaporizhia, where Russia claims to have captured 2 villages. And that's a wrap on America 360. Keep watching NewsX World for more. Thank you.